Hello Internet, my name is the Golden Stalfos, and today I want to talk about Crash Bandicoot. Um, Now I never played Crash Bandicoot when it first came out well, because I was a Nintendo kid. Um, but also, I just never thought it looked very good. Like, yeah, it is a technical achievement to do what they did on PlayStation hardware, but, you know, it's just a platformer with a really shitty camera angle and a really not very good looking jump arc, and that's it. uh, so I never really played it. But recently, I was on Steam and there was a Steam sale for the bundle of the Insane Trilogy and the Spyro Reignited Trilogy. And I have wanted to play the old Spyro games. Subtle plug for my Twitch where I am playing those. Because I played Enter the Dragonfly as a kid and loved it. And everyone else seems to hate it, which is confusing to me because, sure, it's a dumb kids game, but, I don't think it deserves the kind of hate it gets, you know? Um, so maybe the other ones are super great. I don't know. I'll try it. Maybe it's a pales in comparison kind of thing. But so far I haven't seen that. I've only played the first Spyro so far, but it's, missing a ton of the features that I would expect from a Spyro game after having played Enter the Dragonfly. I mean, it's the fourth game, so of course they'd add features each time. So I'm not surprised that those features are missing. It's just, Anyway, so I played Crash Bandicoot as well because why not? And I was right. It is a really shitty platformer and not very fun. You're just running away from the camera while it's tilted at the worst possible angle and you can't see shit and your jump arc is terrible, or you're running towards the camera while it's tilted at an even worse angle and you can't see shit and your jump arc is terrible and you can't see shit because the camera is looking towards you and you're running towards it. Or you have, side scroller sections that are perfectly passable, but not really great, it's okay, but your jump arc is still pretty shit, and that's about it, you know? Um, the game does seem to pride itself on being extra hard, but it's not really that hard. It just has, weird old design philosophies that aren't very player friendly, like the aforementioned shitty camera angles that you can't change. Um, at one point, I got up to the first boss, and it's just a big dude with a hammer. You're supposed to circle around him and jump on his head after he swings the hammer down without getting hit, because you have one hit to make it through the boss, which is ridiculous. Even Dark Souls isn't that shitty to you. Come on. What is this? I mean, it's ridiculous. At one point, I beat the boss, but then he does a weird death animation that apparently damaged me, and so I died and had to do it again. And about 4 attempts later, they were like, "Oh, you're so pathetic. Here, have an Uka Uka so that you can take one hit." And then I cleared that attempt. I'm like, what? What kind of shithead designs a boss fight where you literally can't even you have to hit it 5 times without getting touched at all? That's not just that's not a difficulty thing. That's just stupid design. Fucking Mega Man didn't design shit like that. You know? Like basically any game you can think of that's notorious for being hard. Mega Man isn't really that well known for being hard. Actually, one of the cool things about Mega Man, despite it being a really shitty game overall, is is that the design rule for bosses was that whoever developed the boss had to be able to beat it without getting damaged at all in order to submit it, so that you knew it was fair to a player who had a big ass health bar. But the player still had the big ass health bar and could get hit several times. Um, you know, but yeah, basically, um, my point is, I've never heard of a game that's so shitty it makes you do 5-0 on enemy damage. Like that is a ridiculous ratio that just doesn't make any sense. I mean, I beat the boss and I moved on. I went to the next level. It wasn't impossible or anything. It's just stupid design. Like, even arcade games aren't that shitty. Like, ugh. I really hope not every boss in the game is like that, but probably they are, and that's like fucked up. um I mean, at time of recording I played like 2 hours. I got through like 15 or 20 levels, something like that. And I was like, yeah, this isn't getting any better. I'm bored now. So I turned it off. And that's when I knew I had to write the review, because the point at which you say this isn't getting any better, and then you turn the game off, that's never a good thing. Again, the game isn't really hard as much as it is just like poorly designed from the perspective of a player. Like, there are obstacles. Okay, a great example of this is there are levels where you run forward, and you go over gaps, right? So you run forward, there's gaps, you jump over the gaps, right? But there's not a gap 100% of the time. Obviously, there has to be spots where you land and walk to the next gap, right? So in between those gaps, they put enemies and sometimes obstacles, like these stone wheels that move back and forth. But what they also do is they put these stone wheels on one side of a gap, so that you have to jump past them to get to the next safe spot to stand, right? Okay. But then what they do is sometimes they'll put a gap on the other side of the wheels, so you have to stop on the middle of the thing where the wheels are and then jump again, which isn't impossible. It's not even hard. You can do it in one fluid motion pretty easily. I suck at platformers, and I got through all of these levels no problem. However, what they sometimes do with this is they position the rail where where the wheels go by is positioned just high enough that you can't see the gap on the other side. So you don't know there's a gap you have to avoid until after you've fallen into it. Which is, stupid and unfair. I mean, again, it's not hard. You just restart, do it again, but this time you know. But the thing is, like, if a game's entire sense of difficulty is distributed from, well, the player doesn't know the level yet, so they'll be caught off guard by this and die, and that'll make them feel like they're challenged, then your game is shit, because that's not a challenge. As soon as you have the relevant information, it ceases to be a challenge. Something needs to be a challenge the first time you see it, and the second time you see it, and the third time you see it, every single time you see it, this needs to have the same level of challenge because you always have the information you need to confront it, right? Otherwise, it's not really a challenge. It's like, it would be like if you put, if you gave someone a math test and most of the questions are normal, but every once in a while you slip in something that's way beyond their level. And you say, and if they can't solve those questions, then you just criticize them and say that they're not good enough at math because they didn't even know that. But the thing is, once they get to that level of math, those questions are no longer a challenge. They can be solved easily, as long as you know how to solve them, right? Like, I'll put an equation on the screen, right? Like, if you have a really basic algebra problem, right, that anyone who's been through algebra can solve, let's say x minus 2 equals 4, solve for x, right? That question is not great because x has 2 possible answers there, but no, it doesn't. Never mind. I don't know what I was thinking there. But yeah, so if x minus 2 equals 4, then you know what x is, right? Right? Because you've been through algebra before, so you've seen that. But if you show that to a third grader, they're going to be confused, and they're not going to know what the fuck that is or how to do it. But then when you explain to them the process, then they'll be like, oh, okay, I can do that. And if you show them another equation where it's like x plus 3 equals 4, then they'll know what x is, right? But, so it's just an issue of not having the knowledge yet. And as soon as they do have the knowledge, that equation is easy, right? A challenge is when someone who knows the equation, who knows how these sorts of equations work, still has to go through the process and it still has to take a few seconds to do something. Like if you had, a similar equation, but with like 32 different numbers in it, right? And then it said solve for x, that might take you a minute. You could do it, you could work it out, but you might need some paper or a calculator or something. And that is what difficult is, right? Like when you have the resources you need to solve the equation, but it's, but it's going to take some time and some effort, that's when something is difficult. When something is easy, you have the resources to solve the problem, and the problem is very simple, so you don't even really have to try, right? But if you don't have the information necessary to solve the problem, and the problem is easy once you do have the information, then it's not a challenging problem. It just relies on you not knowing what's coming. It relies on the player being ill-informed. And that sort of challenge isn't a challenge. It's just a waste of everyone's time. Because then as soon as you've completed it, you do have the relevant information. And then it is never seen as a challenge again, right? Like, Dark Souls is really bad about that. The first time you beat Taurus and you run out onto the bridge, you'll get burned alive if you're not careful. But, that's if you're not careful, right? And that only happens to you the first time. after it happens once, you're like, oh, well, there's dragons. This is a thing. So I'll just, you know, go a different way. Or, bait the attack and then run. Or, whatever. Um, like, I run through Dark Souls probably 2 or 3 times a month just for the fuck of it. And I almost never even let the drakes spawn because I know how to do that. And it's not hard to do that. Which means that, the obstacle on the bridge isn't an obstacle. It isn't a challenge, and I don't even think about it most of the time. And, you know, if your entire approach to difficulty is, well, they've never seen this before, so they won't know how to counter it, then that's not difficulty. you know? Um, and oftentimes I did know how to counter things without seeing them. Anytime you see an enemy, the way to counter it is hit the attack button before they do anything. That's it. You know? At one point, I think it was on like the third or fourth level, I was running across these bridges on a tree, and this chick with a shield was standing there. And as soon as I saw her, I was like, okay, I just need to get on top of or around this person by jumping over them. But it took several minutes to make that happen because the spacing on the ledge isn't quite wide enough, so you actually have to jump onto the ledge because she charges at you the second that you come into her line of sight. So you have to jump onto the ledge, then jump back to where you were before. Then before she turns around and goes back, you need to jump back over and then jump. And it's like a huge pain in the ass just to get rid of this one enemy. But it's not impossible, and it's not like hard to execute that sequence. It's just annoying. And this is the main problem with a lot of early games, like arcade games and early console titles, is a lot of the time they didn't understand how to make something difficult except by making it annoying or repetitive, or by spiking the numbers so that you have to redo it over and over again. And that sort of game design has largely disappeared because we recognize that it's not very good design, Like, if a game can't stand up when the enemy health is reduced, then it's not going to work, right? Like think about it this way. In Dark Souls, you can fight every single enemy at level 1, or you can fight every single enemy at level 1000. But all of the enemies still have, interesting things that they do, right? Like, fighting Sif is totally different from fighting the Asylum Demon, which is totally different from fighting the Four Kings, which is totally different from fighting, etc. Whereas in older games where they didn't have as many dimensions to work with and they didn't know as much about game design back then, there's often a situation where enemies just, are all the same but with bigger numbers. And sometimes the bosses will have a unique thing, but you'll often end up with older games where where every single enemy is just your standard enemy. Like, especially if you play, like brawlers, like those side scroller games where you have basically a Street Fighter character, but like, you're up against an endless horde of random dudes. but all the random dudes are the same, right? Um, because there's not that much you can do with them beyond, you know, hand one of them a crowbar or something, you know. Um, and that sort of design philosophy where there's not a whole lot of flexibility, there's not a whole lot of uniqueness, um, seeps through in a lot of early games that try to be hard, because they're trying to be difficult and make you repeat the level over and over again to stretch out the runtime, or to make you give them more quarters. And um, and even games that do have a lot of unique things going on can often fall back on just raising the numbers, right? Like the original Legend of Zelda and the most recent one, for no fucking reason, because 30 years of design history means nothing, but that's a side tangent. In the original Legend of Zelda, when they wanted to have a harder enemy, they had cartridge limitations, so all they could really do is do a palette swap and increase the numbers. And because of that, you end up with, the same enemy model in like 6 different colors, but which color is the easiest and which color is the hardest, right? And Crash Bandicoot doesn't necessarily do this, but these sort of design philosophies that like just don't understand how to make enemies or environments challenging to the player because they grew up playing the arcade games and they want to emulate those arcade games. It's just hard to play through games like this where difficulty is seen as repetition and annoyance rather than as, making you think or plan, or even just making you execute a difficult string of inputs. Like, I don't think reaction commands are super difficult, and I don't think quick time events or things like that are super difficult, but like it is technically skill based, um just not in a way that's interesting. But in the case of games like Crash Bandicoot, there's not, the difficulty comes from the shittiness of the design, not from the greatness of the design, right? Like, you're not challenged because the enemies are so compelling and the environments are laid out so well and the traps are so, devious. You're challenged because your jump arc is shit and your camera angle is horrible and you're struggling to move with this janky ass setup, and the pits are spaced out so that you have no room for error. Like most of the time when you're in a platformer, your bottomless pits aren't going to be the perfect full length of your jump arc, but in Crash Bandicoot they frequently are. So that you literally could not possibly make the jump if you're more than an inch away from the ledge when you do. And there were many occasions where I thought I should be close enough to make the jump, and then I jump, and then I just like graze the front of the ledge and then fall to my death, and I'm like, all right, try it again. But again, like, it's probably the reason I couldn't tell whether or not that jump was something I could do is because the camera angle is so shit, and then there are some things that are just like complete set pieces and don't even really require any skill at all. Like the level where a ball is rolling down at you, I felt no threat from that. I couldn't see any of what was coming up in front of me, but I knew exactly where to jump because there were like tiny little indicators on the ledge you were jumping from, and and I just kind of assumed that they wouldn't design it so that your default jump instinct would lead you off the ledge, um, because I have a little bit of faith in Naughty Dog, not a ton, but a little bit. Um, and I was right, and so I made it through that level perfectly on the first attempt, and that's it. So I think the sections that try to be hard aren't. The sections that try to trick you are the sections where you'll die. And quite frankly, I don't really care if a game is hard or not. I care if it's fun or not, and I wasn't having fun, so I stopped playing. I don't know, maybe Crash 2 and 3 do a better job with their level design and camera angles, and thus aren't as shit, but who knows? Yeah, I didn't play through the whole game. I was still on the starting island. I assume there's other areas because the island didn't look that big. I'd already gone through like 80% of the levels as far as I could tell. But and that only took me like an hour. So, you know. There is a little bit of a challenge in collecting all of the boxes, but it's more of a challenge of like figuring out how the fuck there are 3 boxes left when you went through the entire level and didn't see any boxes that hadn't been murdered. So then you go back through the level again and you still don't see anything that hasn't been murdered, and you're just wondering, is there like some shit that just barely off camera that I'm supposed to know about and I don't know about because I'm not a fuckhead and I didn't Google this ahead of time? Is that what's happening? Because that really feels like the only explanation. It's also worth noting that your camera angle is so shit. There are boxes with arrows on them that make you jump upwards when you land on top of them. And typically, positioned above these boxes will be a box of fruit that you slam into over and over again. And but the problem is that your camera is angled downwards so much that you often can't see these boxes of fruit when you're at their level, right? And so that's dumb, you know? Like, that's dumb. Like, there shouldn't be any game elements that are off camera if you have a fixed camera. That's just like so basic. I didn't even think it needed to be said, but yeah, if you're designing a game with a fixed camera, the camera should show everything to the player. Otherwise, you should have the camera movable so that the player can pan around and look at the things that you put off camera. Make sense? Cool. Yeah, basically, if you didn't grow up with Crash Bandicoot and have nostalgia for it, I can't recommend. It's a pretty shit game experience. I really didn't enjoy any of it. It was just not very well made from a design perspective. Again, visually, this was a technical achievement for Naughty Dog on the PS1, and there are even articles about how like PlayStation themselves were astonished that Naughty Dog was able to do this. But, you know, in general, it's just like doesn't have a very good level layout and doesn't have a very good camera placement and doesn't have a very good jump arc. And like, I don't know, a game design that's built entirely around, you know, punishing the player with, hey, you didn't complete all the stuff because you didn't grab all the things. Why don't you try again and grab all the things and maybe even do a timed run? Huh? Like, that's just padding the game out, you know? Like, I don't care. Um, and I think that, if you really are confident in your game and in like the design and how fun it is, then you won't need to prod players to go back and redo stuff because they'll do it just because they want to, just because it's fun. Um, so you don't need to pad out the length of your game by saying, go do it again, you know? But again, like, this game is from way back at the beginning of, you know, the PS1. So there were a lot of old design sensibilities, and making players do it again was like the best thing in the world to old school game designers. So I understand it. It's shitty and dumb, and I don't like it, but I understand it. Um, yeah, overall, cannot recommend. Uh, Play something newer. If you were looking for a platformer, Mario exists. I I mean, I've never been able to beat a Mario game because I'm not good at platformers, but you know, they do at least control well and have a clear view of the environment and the character and the enemies. So that's good. And yeah, that's everything. So thank you all for watching, and I'll see you in the next life. Laters. Okay, end card time. I'm supposed to tell you to like, comment, subscribe, all that stupid YouTube shit. There's a bell thingy, whatever. I have all the social media stuff: Facebook, Twitter, Twitch, YouTube. Mostly I use Facebook and Twitter to tell you about my Twitch and YouTube uploads. I've got a Patreon, but Patreon is one of those things where people who can afford to throw away money give money to people who can't. And so if you can't afford to throw away money, then you shouldn't be doing that. And if you can afford to throw away money, consider charities. There's a pandemic, there's global warming, there's millions of people in the world who don't have toilets, which is just awful. So I've linked a few charities in the description down below in case you're interested in that. And if you can't donate money to a charity, consider donating some of your time, because that's also very useful. And yeah, thanks for watching. Bye.